Hey, welcome to our channel, Ancient to Modern. We are going through the New Testament and bringing this ancient document to life in this modern world. It might not be the best name, it might not stick, but that's where we are right now. As we're going through the New Testament, last week we talked about the book of Acts. And so I thought today we would do a little character study of the main character in the book of Acts, which is Paul. And Paul, I think, is a figure that, while prominent, is probably not the best understood person ever. There's a few things about him that I think we get wrong, but I think it's good to take some time and really delve into who this character was. When we meet him in the book of Acts, we just have a brief mention. He's at least tacitly supporting a mob action against Stephen. Stephen is telling people about Jesus, and the mob gets so enraged that they decide to stone him, and they lay their coats at the feet of this young Saul. So let's talk about Saul. Saul was born in Tarsus, and that's a city we don't know much about. Tarsus is in modern-day Turkey on the Mediterranean coast, about 6-8 miles inland. It's on a river called the Cydnus River, and it was in a fertile valley where a lot of agriculture happened, but it was also on a main east-west trade route. And so if you were going from the western part of the kingdom to the eastern part of the kingdom, you would have to pass by Tarsus. Tarsus was important for another reason. If you go back 100, 150 years before Paul, was right in the middle of a Roman civil war. You have Augustus on one side, and you have Mark Antony on the other. And Mark Antony was trying to gain advantage, and so he beckoned a person you might have heard of, the Queen of Egypt, named Cleopatra. And it was in Tarsus they had their love affair, and they joined forces against Augustus. Now, unsuccessful, but as a result of that, and because that rebellion had been centered in Tarsus, from that day forward, Rome kept a permanent army garrison in this area of Tarsus. And so imagine, here's a city of trade, a city of a good population, and a city with a permanent Roman army garrison. It was also a city with a Jewish population. Well, if you're a Roman army, you might need tents. You might need tents to stay at Tarsus, but anytime you're on the move, you would also need tents. So you would maybe go to a local person to help provide you tents. Now, we know that Saul, our Apostle Paul, was a Roman citizen. Now, it was pretty rare to be a Roman citizen in that day. 80%, 90% of everyone in Rome would have been considered slaves. How is it that Paul was a Roman citizen? Well, the easiest way is probably Paul's father was a Roman citizen. How did he get to be a citizen? Well, if Paul was a tent maker, in all likelihood his dad was a tent maker. And if we start to connect the dots, it's pretty easy to see that probably Paul's dad made tents for the Roman army. And in return for his service, he was granted citizenship. One can imagine this young Jewish boy named Saul going around taking his Jewish studies very seriously. And he was a dedicated student. He was driven. He really believed that the Messiah was coming and would make the world right and would defeat Israel's enemies. And it's easy to see that this Roman army was all the power is camped right outside the city he grew up in. They're not the rightful rulers of the world. It should be the Messiah. And as he's doing his studies, and Paul was a Pharisee, so he came from a very strict and a very highly Jewish family. Their Jewishness was important to them. And one can see probably Saul joining his dad, taking tents to the Roman army. It'd be later in his life that someone in the Roman army would end Paul's life with beheading. It's just one of the ironies of Saul's life. So Saul goes on, he's very driven. He later goes to Jerusalem, studies under Rabbi Hillel's grandson, Gamaliel. And he was a prized student, and he ascended rapidly through the ranks. Now there's two things that we get wrong about Paul. First thing, We say his name was Saul until God changed his name. God never changed Saul's name. If you were a Roman citizen, your first name was your tribal name, or Saul. Your second name would have been your Roman name, which was Paul, or Saulus Paulus of Tarsus, where you were born. For his entire life, Paul was Saulus Paulus of Tarsus. When we meet Saul, he's in Jerusalem with other Jews, therefore he's Saul. When he goes on his missionary journeys, they call him Paul because he's out in the empire. It would have been his Roman name. And we forget in Acts 21 again, when he goes back to Jerusalem, they call him Saul again. There's no name change. And here's a thing that I think we get wrong about Paul. A lot of people say he was never married. I think that's a tragic mistake. You did not get to be in the Jewish ruling council. You did not ascend higher than most of your peers unless you were married. That's how important marriage was. I think Saul was married. Now, I think it's true toward the end of his life as he's writing in Corinth. I don't think Paul's married then. In a time in an age when so many people died of the common cold or died of the flu, a third of women died in childbirth, I think she had departed from the scene by then. But Saul was married at some point in his life. So when we meet Saul, he's this driven young man. And he's been given an assignment to go to Damascus. There's Christians there causing a problem in the synagogue, and he's there to investigate and make things right. Now, here's another thing that we say is wrong. Saul was going up and he's going to kill Christians. No, he wasn't. No one had that authority in the ancient world except for Rome. If you wanted to get on Rome's bad side, you carry out a capital punishment without their permission. Saul could go up and do discipline within the Jewish framework. He might have been able to even bring some people back for trial in Jerusalem, but he did not have the authority to kill anyone. But Saul was going up. His presence would have been unnerving if you were a Christian. So here's this driven man going to do yet another assignment. It's what he did well. He was zealous. He wanted to be sure this foolishness about Jesus was stamped out. No Jew worth his salt would ever believe that Jesus was the Messiah. A Messiah that died on the cross? No, Deuteronomy says, cursed is anyone who hangs on a tree. There's no way that a Jesus could be the Messiah. And so this very driven wanted to get to the heights of the Jewish ruling council. He was heading up to do another assignment well. Right up until that afternoon when that event happened on the Damascus Road. I don't think Paul was converted on that day either. Before that day, he was doing his dead level best to be fully devoted to God. And after that day, he was also fully devoted to God. It's just his thinking had changed. I don't think he was converted. Everything he thought was reoriented now. Now it's no longer following the rules, the law that's most important. It's this experience he had with the risen Christ. And it would change his thinking about everything. I wanted to do a little character study about Paul and the person that we meet. If you want to do some study yourself, here's a couple books that I can highly recommend. One's called The Paul Quest by a guy named Ben Witherington. He is a professor at Asbury Seminary. It's very good, but I even more highly recommend Paul, a biography by N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright is Bishop of Canterbury in the Anglican Church and professor of religion at St. Andrews University. And if you want to do study, you would do well to acquaint yourself with either of these books. Hey, thanks for joining us. Please like us, subscribe to us, leave a thumbs up at the bottom, and better yet, hey, ask any question. We want to interact. We want to answer your questions and make this all about you so we can kind of go through this journey and know more about our faith together. I'll see you next week.